finish up. So, Mr. Andeer, you've argued in the past, in testimony before the Arizona House of Representatives, and in your written testimony, that the 30% commission is not just a payment processing fee, but it also reflects, as many of the other senators discussed with you, the secure app environment created by Apple and the fact that the App Store is like a studio for developers, providing developer applications and APIs to help them build apps. So, first of all, I guess my question is similar to what you've heard before. If that was the case, it seems like all developers benefit from the secure Apple environment, and that all developers who roll in the Apple Developer Program for $99 get access to App Store developer tools. What benefits, in addition to payment processing, do the developers who must pay the in-app purchase commission get? It sounds like all they get is payment processing is an inflated price. I'm just trying to figure out the difference. And you've had a discussion, of course, with Senator Lee about the difference between dating and getting a ride, which was fascinating, one I will never forget. You've had a discussion with Senator Hawley about, why don't you just have this security fee charged, or there's just no way this can cost 30% of what they bring in, the security piece of it. So my question is, again, what benefits, in addition to payment processing, do the developers who must pay the in-app purchase commission get?
Sure, Senator, and I appreciate the question. The model that we introduced along with opening up the iPhone to third-party development 12 years ago was simple. We said, hey, if you're going to sell a digital good or service, you're going to be subject to the commission. That supports all of the investments and all of the things we've done in terms of continuing to open up the iPhone in additional features and technologies. We've gone from 10,000 APIs to 250,000. We have launched frameworks and resources and software to make it incredibly easy for a developer to build an app. We have built a store that's now in 175 different countries with unique storefronts. We have an editorial team that features different applications and different developers. And so there's an incredible amount of investment that we make into the App Store and the technology platform that supports the store. And we recuperate that, and we drive that from the commission structure. And we think that's been a fair deal, and it's proven out over the last 12 years in the form of, we've got 1.7 million apps. We've got incredible rich array of content available to our consumers. So we see this as a business that's been great for developers.
But wouldn't it be better for consumers if these guys were able to tell them that they could get cheaper rates somewhere else?
Senator, I absolutely agree, and they all do. Spotify.
Spotify can say, hey, you can get a cheaper rate on our website. Can they say that on your app?
So to be clear, Senator, Spotify can do that through one of its more than 8,000 partnerships. What it does in our app and what we say in our app, much like what Verizon would say to Apple, if we said, hey, we want to come into the Verizon store and put a sign up that says, go buy our iPhone down the street at the Apple store. They're not going to allow us to do that. No retailer is going to allow us to do that. The App Store
there's a difference with
fundamental premise.
Okay, I think there's a difference. Maybe Mr. Gutierrez, you want to respond with that analogy, with where they are when they're depending on you for this App Store.
I do, and this is highlighting a really important point. Apple takes the position that our users are their users, that they own the customer relationship. They're injecting themselves in the middle of the relationship, and they believe that they can control our communications with them, our offers to them, the promotions and benefits that we would give them. And that is the heart of the problem here, which is this is a model where basically a handful of global gatekeeper platforms can't claim that they own the user relationship of all the users of all the apps that are offered on the mobile platforms. That is the path that this approach is leading to, which is why it is so important that these issues are addressed.
Yes. Dr. Cooper, I know you haven't gotten too many questions, but you didn't get a call last night not to testify. So, that's not what they said, too.
They might not.
They didn't say that to Match.com, but they questioned their earnings statement. What's even better, you didn't get a question like that, right? Okay, so I guess I want to know from your perspective as someone who advocates on consumers' behalf. So this issue that we were just talking about with Apple and with Spotify, which is really an issue for everyone that can't advertise that you can get cheaper rates for their consumers. How does that affect consumers? And how does the fee? Two separate things: the ban on telling them that they can get cheaper rates somewhere, and then the fee.
Well, look, if these folks could compete on a level playing field, it would have a benefit that has been missed here. That would put tremendous competitive pressure on the platforms. And they would look out in the world and say, holy mackerel, we could lose all these customers to someone else who's treating them fairly. And so that would put tremendous pressure on the platform. The second thing that could happen is that these folks could get together and say, you know what, we've got enough users to build our own platform and new entry. That was the logic of the Microsoft case, which in fact, if you go down the list of abuses you started with, is identical to the Microsoft case. How it is for 20 years we have not won the court cases, and we have them now. It's amazing. It is amazing how much they've done the same dirty old business practices. So, and those hurt consumers. We learned that a long time ago. Our best protection is real competition, and this is a space in which we don't have.
Exactly. I bet you've been waiting to say that, Dr. Cooper, behind your mask.
I kept trying to find a way to
sitting
get it.
here. Okay, so the House Antitrust Subcommittee Digital Markets Report cited estimates that Apple makes between $15 and $18 billion a year on the App Store, Mr. Andeer. But according to Philip Shoemaker, Apple's former director of app review for the App Store, it costs less than $100 million a year to run the App Store. That sounds like an incredibly profitable business, and frankly, as was noted by several of my colleagues, those look like monopoly profits. How does Apple justify the 30% commission fee rate when the cost of running the App Store is so much lower than the revenues the company generates from the App Store?
Senator, I appreciate the question. As I've mentioned, Apple's invested significant sums in technologies, resources, tools to allow developers to build their apps, far in excess of this $100 million figure.
Okay, so then what is the correct number?
Senator, I don't have the exact figure. I know it's more than $100 billion that we've invested in iOS and iPhone.
Do you know how much revenue it generated last year? I mean, it's relevant because we're talking here about a monopoly situation.
Senator, understood. When we look at the App Store, it's not a separate standalone business for us. It's an integrated feature of our devices. And so we don't have a separate profit and loss statement for the App Store. What we do know is that the economic opportunity has been studied and assessed. And we know that developers are creating apps, whether it's mobile advertising or selling physical goods or digital goods and content, that's generated more than $500 billion. I think you mentioned this in your opening statement. So there's an incredible economic opportunity that's been created for developers. On a very small percentage of those sales, do we levy a commission.
Okay, but so you have no numbers, which I'm sure exists. We'll try asking you in writing, but I have no choice but to go with the House numbers because there is no other number on the table, and that it's $100 million a year to run the App Store and that you make $15 to $18 billion. So, Mr. White, how much does it cost Google to run the Play Store, and how much revenue did it generate in the last full year?
Senator, I don't have those exact numbers, but happy to follow up with your team on that. What I can say, though, is with the Android ecosystem, the amount of competition and choice that has brought to the mobile landscape, how it's brought down the cost of mobile devices. As I said in my opening statement, you can get an Android phone now for less than $100. And in your opening comments, you talked about accessibility and why it's important for people to have access to mobile devices. And we think that's what Android has actually brought to this landscape. And almost 2 million American jobs that have been created by this ecosystem.
Okay, and I believe, as I said very clearly at the beginning, that I don't challenge the success. I proud that we've developed these innovations in America, but you have to keep rejuvenating capitalism. You have to keep allowing new people to come up with new ideas. And I'm not going to go beyond this issue, but I think, well, maybe I will for 30 seconds. But I think when you look at some of these purchases of Facebook, of Instagram and WhatsApp and what's happened, and then you look at all the problems we've had in terms of privacy and other things, that you're literally stifling. This is not about you, of course, but in general, the tech companies are stifling some of the new developments we could see for privacy and other things by how this has all gone down. And then you have on top of that the issues for consumers. And I guess, do you think, Dr. Cooper, listening to those numbers I just read out, which are the only ones available to us, do you think that these companies are operating in a competitive market, Apple and Google?
Actually, there are other numbers which are in one of the reports we will file with the committee.
Okay.
I looked at the learner index for these for these two companies, and it is way above the national average. Mm-hmm. They are overcharging consumers for their products and earning excess profits. And these two companies in particular. There were other digital companies that were much lower, and it turned out that they exist in marketplaces where they face much more competition. The absence of competition in that document, and I will call your staff's attention to it, is demonstrated to me that we are being overcharged and our prices could be lower. And
you're not, none of the companies here before us are saying that this, in person here, are saying that this should be free, right? You're just questioning the amount of the charges.
There should be a normal rate of profit on that line of business. Mm-hmm. And as you've heard and you suggested, there is not. And the only way they can keep that is if they exercise their market power and lock consumers out.
Okay. Another related issue. Mr. Gutierrez, some developers have raised concerns about App Store operators preferencing their own apps in App Store's searches so that their apps show up at the top of the search results. I remember a long time ago this issue raised in a different context by Senator Lee. Do you share this concern?
Yes, this is just another manifestation of the complete control that they have, and the fact that the decision on who gets promoted, who gets discoverable, is really completely manipulated to help Apple's own services. So this makes it really clear. We've heard Apple say a number of times about all the value that they brought to these apps, including some of the services that are represented here. The reality, Senator, is that Spotify, and I can say the same thing probably for Match and for Tile, we're not successful because of what Apple has done. We have been successful despite Apple's interference. And we would have been much more successful, but for their anti-competitive behavior.
Okay. So, Mr. White, what are the factors Google uses to display app results when a consumer searches for something in the Play Store? Does it preference Google-owned apps in the Play Store? Has it ever done so?
Absolutely not, Senator. I mean, we're an information company, and our core business model depends on users trusting us to provide accurate, unbiased information. And so we don't preference our first-party services over our third-party services in the Google Play Store. We want, when users come to the Play Store searching for their favorite apps or games, for them to find the most relevant information.
Okay, Mr. Andeer, I've seen news reports that Apple has a 42-factor algorithm for how it displays app results when a consumer searches for something. Is that correct? And which factors weigh most heavily in your algorithm? Does Apple preference Apple-owned apps in the App Store searches? Has it ever done so?
Senator, I'm not intimately familiar with our search algorithm in the App Store, but I do know that we do not favor our own applications or services in the search functionality. And again, I think if you look at the experience over the last 12 years, I mean, we have over 500 million users who have found and downloaded Spotify during that time. Same is true for a whole host of other companies that compete with us. So the objective evidence is, hey, consumers are finding what they were looking for. So no, we do not favor ourselves in search.
Ms. Dowd, do those answers give you comfort?
No, they do not.
Why not?
Because we're hearing over and over things that aren't consistent with our experience. For instance, earlier today, Mr. Andeer said that we couldn't talk about the MFI agreement because they were in negotiations with other developers regarding that agreement. But we were told that basically we could not negotiate that agreement, and that agreement we had to sign as is, and in fact that they're not going to give us any more information about this program unless we actually sign it. So it's things like that that make me question some of the statements.
Mr. Andeer, and I'll ask this of both of you, I guess, Mr. White. A number of app developers have complained about a lack of transparency regarding the application of Apple's and Google's respective App Store rules and policies. And they have expressed frustration about often not knowing why an app or an app update has been rejected. For each app or update that is rejected or removed from the App Store by Apple, Mr. Andeer, will Apple commit to providing the developer of the app with a written explanation of why the app or update was removed or rejected in a timely manner, including citations to the applicable Apple rules or policies under which the decision was made? Will you do that?
Senator, we do that today. We have guidelines, and we have for 12 years. We are in constant engagement and discussion with developers. As I mentioned, we get 100,000 submissions each week. We have to reject 40% of those, whether it's for performance, safety, security, or some other reason. In each and every instance, we try to communicate what the issues are, and we talk to thousands of developers each and every week.
And Google answers on that?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Very good question. Very similarly, that's generally our practice today. I will say one caveat to that is if there is a serious security violation, we may remove that app more quickly just to make sure we're protecting our users and their devices. As I said, the Google Play Protect monitoring program scans 100 billion apps every day, right? And so if there is a major security violation, we will take that app off of the Play Store very quickly and then communicate with the developer on what the violation may have been.
Okay.
And Senator, whenever we do take enforcement actions like that, we do give our developer partners avenues for redress. They can appeal those decisions, and they can have those decisions reviewed again. And so we make sure that our developers are in constant communication on how they can be in compliance with those publicly stated policies.
Anything on this? Want to respond, Mr. Gutierrez?
Senator, our experience may illustrate a little bit of how this application of these rules actually happen in practice. It happened to us multiple times when we decided to take IAP down after Apple launched a competing service at a price below ours. We complied with the rules as they existed at the time, which basically said we couldn't have a buy button or a link to a payment mechanism. So we decided, okay, we'll take that. It won't be part of that. Apple then came back and they said, it isn't just that we couldn't have a buy button in our app if we didn't have IAP. We couldn't even email our users to tell them about a way to upgrade. We couldn't mention in the app that they could get a premium app. We couldn't tell them that they were discounts or promotional plans that they could sign on. And then what happened is the month after we did that, after they had engaged in this extensive, expansive interpretation that wasn't supported by the rules, they changed the rules to retroactively support the interpretation that they had started applying in our case. That is what total control of their ecosystem means in the case of Apple.
Okay, Mr. Sine. And then I have one more question to you, Mr. Sine, then I'm almost done.
Our experience has been similar to Mr. Gutierrez. I mean, we've had situations, and it's not really that they don't tell you which rule you violated. They don't tell you how you violated that rule or how to fix it. And that's the problem. We had an app, one of our Tinder builds, that actually had a very important safety feature for our LGBTQ plus community, where it would actually inform users when they were in a country where they might be at risk for exposing their gender identity or otherwise. That sat in the App Store review process for 2 months because Apple had said that we were violating a new policy, or they said the spirit of the policy, and couldn't tell us expressly how we needed to solve it in order to get that launched. We had to go all the way up to talking to the chief executives through our chief executive at IAC at the time in order to actually get that app unblocked 2 months later.
Well, okay, so, just to kind of pull this out from the trees to the forest here. So, and I think, Mr. Stein, I'll do this with you here. So, I think one of the things that people think, they hear all this, and they think, well, why don't you just sell it on your website then? Why do you need these guys? If they're doing this to you, why can't you just go and compete on the web on your own? Could you answer that?
Yeah, like I said at the beginning of my testimony, they have essentially taken the internet and moved it into the app stores. And so they've set up their gateways, they've set up their toll booths. You got to pay the toll if you're a digital good and service. They give everybody else access onto the freeway. And what we're saying is, why isn't the freeway the same for everyone? And why isn't everybody paying the same thing as they're traveling down the freeway? And we've never gotten a good answer to that, Senator.
And so to me, when I hear all this, I think, okay, our laws are exactly the same that they were, basically. Our competitive policy laws, our antitrust laws, even our privacy laws on the federal basis are the same from back whenever it was, and whoever did it, we're not going to get into that, the internet started. And that, in fact, we've seen this major change, major ecosystem change, and we're just not as sophisticated as these biggest companies the world has ever seen, who we're very proud of in many ways, but that are basically using that system. And so that leads a number of us up here to say we need to get changes. And the first thing is we need to have the agencies be as sophisticated as they can, which is why Senator Grassley and I have the proposal, something we can do immediately. The appropriations process is more at the end of the year, to be able to change the fees for mega mergers. This is across the board, not just tech, so that we can get more money to the FTC and to the DOJ antitrust. And by the way, that was supported by the Trump administration, just like these lawsuits were actually brought by the Trump administration, which I have commended Macon Delrahim over at DOJ antitrust and former chair of the FTC, Simon, for doing, and are now being continued by the Democratic administration, which is how some of these sexual suits, as you know, Dr. Cooper, have gone in the past. They've bridged administrations. And so we think that we need to get funding to really play them out like they should. And the second thing we could look at, in addition to my bill, which I'm not going to go on it since it is 5:20 p.m., on the Competition and Antitrust Law Enforcement Reform Act, which ups the standards on exclusionary conduct and would really help us adapt to the world we're in. I can't even call it a new world. We've been in it for quite a while and we haven't done anything about it. But the other thing we could do, I know state lawmakers in Arizona, Massachusetts, North Dakota, which isn't exactly a radical state. I was just over there with Senator Hoeven and the Republican governor on a water project. But I mean, they're looking at this. My home state of Minnesota are looking at legislation on a state-by-state basis to regulate app stores. And some of you have been involved in these conversations. In your opinion, should we consider legislation on the federal basis to regulate app stores, and why?
I 100% agree that that would be the right course of action. The reality is, as I said in my opening statement, this mandatory in-app payment structure, the way they have this set up, that is the lifeblood of their monopoly. It is their lifeblood to get the data from the users. It is their lifeblood to fund all these excess profits they're getting. It is their lifeblood to be able to identify what competing apps are and who their users are, how much they pay, when they pay, everything. And if you cut that off, and the reason they're fighting so hard to defend it, the reason they went in and hired every lobbyist in the state of Arizona to defeat it.
Probably not everyone.
Everyone but the one we hired.
Okay.
The reality is they are fighting so hard because it is core to the maintenance of their monopoly.
Okay. Anyone else want to take that?
Senator, I would just add that in addition to the appropriations process that you mentioned, and in addition to the bill, we actually, the broad bill that you have proposed, we actually think it is important to pair that with more specific legislation on App Store issues. The way that some of the states are taking this legislation, we think this is an action that's important for federal preemption. These markets are not only national, they're global. These decisions that are made in Cupertino are decisions that affect our business in Indonesia and all over the world. So this is a space in which specific legislation on the App Store issues would be very welcome and very beneficial.
Dr. Cooper?
Senator, as soon as you get a bunch of states considering this legislation, these guys will come running to you and say, you got to give me federal legislation.
And I've experienced this before in other contexts, yes. But
yes, they'll want it, and they figure they have a better chance to negotiate with you than the individual state.
You mean this subcommittee? I don't know about that.
Well, this is the place, remarkable bipartisan, this is the place to fix the key things about the antitrust.
No. I know, and this is the place where we should fix them.
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Daru?
I just wanted to reiterate what Mr. Gutierrez said about having a specific App Store bill, just because the mobile phones are the gateway to so many aspects of our lives: banking, news, dating, music, health, fitness, and clearly there are abuses that have been exposed today and in the House report that need to be addressed. And we're concerned that if we wait for sweeping legislation or legislation that may need to be hold out in the courts over several years to understand what the impact is to the mobile ecosystem, we could have more irreparable damage done to competition and innovation in America. I do want to commend you and your bill because it is a great step in the right direction. We absolutely need strong prohibitions against exclusionary behavior and discriminatory behavior, but would just respectfully request that some consideration be given to an App Store specific bill.
I mean, everything we're looking at, the newspapers allowing to, because of, what happened in Australia, what's happening right here, and other news organizations to combine their bargaining power, this idea of an App Store bill, some the gateway bills. I still believe, and I'm the author of the newspaper one, and I'm going to work really hard to get it done this year. Just like you're talking about, I don't think we can wait. But the best thing would be to admit that we have a huge monopoly problem here across the board, and to just put in some stiffer rules and standards. And there is a number of Republicans right now, as I speak, that are with me on this, to, even though they're not on my bill yet, but on pieces of that bill, to be able to make it easier to bring these cases. And that way, then some of this behavior stops, even if they're never brought in a case, because people know that it's a real thing. It's going to happen if they keep acting like that. And that's not just mergers going forward. It's also looking back at exclusionary conduct, as well as some of the other violations we've talked about. Senator Lee, do you want to close with anything?
No, Ed, thank you very much for holding this hearing. Thanks to each of you for being here.
And
it's been very informative.
Right, exactly. And our two witnesses from Apple and Google, do you want to, I should give you an opportunity if you want to say anything about legislation and the like.
Yes, Senator Klobuchar, and thank you. You're asking very important questions, particularly as it relates to funding of the enforcement agency. So we'll be happy to engage with you and other members of Congress as you work through these issues. But before I wrap this answer, I'd like to say that, like, each of the members on the panel here, the companies that are represented, are important partners of ours, and they are raising issues. From where we sit, Senator, we're trying to keep at an ecosystem level, we're trying to keep the costs low for the ecosystem and keep our prices competitive with the numerous distribution channels that developers have available to them in this very dynamic industry. But I do worry that may be difficult to do if, in an effort to satisfy a very small but vocal set of primarily large companies, we damage the very foundation that has allowed the Android open source ecosystem to work so well for a much larger set of small and medium-sized businesses. That's the risk, and that's what we would want to engage with your office and other members of Congress on as you tackle these very important questions.
Mr. Andeer?
Senator, again, thank you for giving us the opportunity to participate today and share our perspective on this. When it comes to proposals, I spent a decade of my career in federal antitrust enforcement, both at the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice. I have a deep respect for what their role is in their job each and every day, and an understanding of how difficult it is. So I'm certainly a supporter for doubling, tripling down in terms of resources for those men and women that carry out a really important role each and every day. In terms of other issues, I've long appreciated your championing of competition. I recall when I was at the FTC, you raising issues around pharmaceutical mergers and other things that we took a very careful look at. So I've always been appreciative of your interest in this area, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future.
Okay. Well, this has been quite informative, I think, for everyone. I think the facts that we've gathered here today are going to be useful for us for legislation, for the Justice Department. Just today or this week, we have the top 2 positions filled with a third one on the way. In the Justice Department, we have FTC commissioners being nominated, hearings. I was just at a hearing in Commerce for one of the nominees, and there's a lot happening and a lot of interest from the administration. And so, and I do want to just tick through this just from my perspective. We've got a situation where we've got the fees that are higher than I ever imagined. I was looking at furniture stores and I couldn't figure out why one major one wasn't on the App Store. That was about 3 weeks ago. And now I understand one, because they're just probably decided I'm not going to pay this high a fee, because I thought, did they do something wrong? Why can't I access this on my Apple? It's literally what I thought. I thought, oh, maybe they don't have one. Or maybe I do it this way. And I just think there's something pretty messed up about this, because as you said, it's kind of taken over the internet in that way. And the second point is this idea of, which we have to look further into, but self-preferencing and competing, having direct competition of their own products. And the third one is just this idea that consumers are literally there, that companies are being banned from telling consumers they can get a better deal. When they're on a monopoly, the only way they can be on and get to those consumers in a big way is through one of these 2 app stores, which are on different platforms. Obviously, people use those platforms for different reasons, but they each dominate those platforms. And so as I hear the arguments that I've heard today, point one, this argument that a lot of them pay nothing, and that's great. Well, that still doesn't inoculate a company from liability for anti-competitive conduct. We just have to remember that. And there's ways you could structure this, obviously. Regulators, my guess, are going to have to get involved. So you wouldn't be hurting all the small apps and the little apps out there, but you're just making this so that people are not hurt by monopoly conduct. Secondly, we need to protect. One of the arguments we get is a security argument, more so I think from Apple, lesser extent from Google, because it allows sideloading. But of course, we have to protect security and privacy. But I think some of the arguments here made where there's got to be a better way to do this than a 30% charge for it. Or requiring apps to use only your in-app payment processor, or without barring developers from telling consumers. There's no way that telling consumers about a cheaper rate is going to affect security. You're just telling them, hey, you can also go over to this website. Third point made, that the App Store is built by them and they put incredible work into it, is true. So now they get to run it the way they want. Well, as been noted, those were the arguments made in the past. That's, I'm sure, what Standard Oil said. I wasn't there back then. I am sure that is what AT&T said for sure. They had a horizontal and a vertical monopoly. They put all this in. They produced all this great stuff. I know, because I represented MCI shortly after that breakup, and as they were trying to get into local monopolies and to try to compete in that market. And I saw, despite this claim, that the world was going to fall apart. In fact, the chairman of AT&T, after all this went down, said they were actually a stronger company because of it, because they were forced to compete. And we saw lower long-distance rates, and we also saw this incredible launch of a cell phone industry, which, when you go back to the beginning, was nothing but cell phones the size of Gordon Gekko's in the movie Wall Street at the very beginning. So I just don't think this "we built it, so trust us and we can run it" is going to work anymore. Because if you look at history as a guide, of course people build things and they do great things. They employ a bunch of people, and then at some point it becomes a monopoly, and then it becomes a problem, as Adam Smith warned, and then we're supposed to be doing something about it. Without necessarily, of course, not getting rid of these companies. We want these companies. It's just a question of how you ensure that everyone that works, that the companies that work in that are present in the capitalist system can do their bidding, so that we actually have a capitalist system. And so the point number 4, our app stores create jobs for many small entrepreneurs. We heard this. That's great. And those are great things. Fostering innovation in that way is important. But again, it's not an inoculation. And another way you really foster innovation is when you allow companies that get to a certain point where they actually can compete. We'll never know if Instagram could have competed against Facebook because they bought them, because they viewed them as disruptive, to use Mark Zuckerberg's own word. And so that's the same thing here. I don't think you can just say, well, just because someone is a little more in our line of business, online dating compared to car rides, well, that's different then. Or some music, or your products with Tile. I just think that there's not a coincidence that the three of you are before us today, because of the fact that that's getting into their business. And I just don't see this differentiation, as Senator Lee so well pointed out. So with that, I will keep the hearing open for 2 weeks. I just made that up. We'll keep this the record open for 2 weeks, and we look forward to following up on all this. We thank all of our witnesses for being with us through a lengthy hearing, and we look forward to working with you. The hearing is adjourned.